February 14, 1985, Federal Correctional Institution, Dublin, California. 3:14 a.m. Static. The high-pitched whine of the security monitors is the only sound vibrating through the Special Housing Unit, the SHU. Inside Cell Block 4, the air is thick with the smell of industrial floor wax and the metallic tang of old copper pipes. Griselda Blanco sits on the edge of her thin, regulation cot. She is perfectly still, her back a rigid line of defiance, staring at a blank concrete wall as if she can see through the stone, through the miles of desert, all the way back to the neon-soaked bloodbath of Miami. Outside her heavy steel door, two tactical guards in midnight black gear adjust their grips on suppressed weapons. They move with the synchronized rhythm of men expecting a war, their breath shallow behind tactical masks. They have been told that this woman, this 5'2" grandmother, is currently orchestrating a multi-state execution from inside this 6x9 concrete box. They wait for the signal to breach, expecting to find a hidden radio, a weapon, or a frantic conspirator. When they kick the door down, the boom echoing like a gunshot through the silent wing, they don't find a monster mid-roar. They find a woman who doesn't even flinch. She doesn't reach for a blade or a phone. In her hand is a single hand-drawn map. It isn't a map of a drug route or a getaway path. It is a meticulous professional-grade rendering of the prison's own ventilation system, sketched with terrifying precision on the back of a legal deposition. This was the night the Federal Bureau of Prisons learned a hard, cold truth. Locking her up didn't stop the war. It just gave her the blueprints to the fortress. To understand how a woman in isolation could hold the United States government hostage, you have to understand the world she built before they put her in chains. By the mid-1980s, the Reagan administration had declared an all-out war on drugs. To the feds, Griselda Blanco was the ultimate trophy. She was the godmother, the Black Widow, the woman who had allegedly invented the motorcycle drive-by and turned Miami into a graveyard to secure her empire. When they finally put the cuffs on her, the system breathed a sigh of relief. They believed that by stripping her of her silk robes, her gold-plated submachine guns, and her fleet of armored cars, they had neutralized the threat. They thought that without her tools she was just a woman, but the cocaine trade in Miami wasn't slowing down. It was accelerating. While Griselda sat in the SHU, the body count in South Florida was reaching record highs, and the signatures on the hits were unmistakably hers. Special Agent Bob Palumbo, the DEA lead who had spent years hunting her like a ghost, couldn't sleep. He paced his office staring at surveillance photos of crime scenes, realizing with a sinking gut feeling that his career-defining arrest might have been a tactical retreat by Griselda. The walls weren't keeping her in. They were keeping her rivals out. The feds were desperate. They assumed there was a sophisticated smuggling ring operating inside the prison. They tore apart the laundry room, intercepted every visitor, and x-rayed the soles of the guards' boots. They were looking for high-tech bugs and bags of cash, failing to realize they were dealing with a woman who had turned psychological manipulation into a sovereign currency. Griselda knew something the warden didn't. Every system has a nervous system, and if you know where to pinch, the whole body reacts. The warden, Sarah Jenkins, was a career bureaucrat who prized order above all else. To her, Griselda was a PR nightmare waiting to happen. Jenkins increased the pressure, initiating a blackout lockdown. No mail, no visitors, no exercise, total sensory deprivation. They wanted to break Griselda's spirit, to crush her until she was willing to testify against the Medellin cartel just to see the sun again. They used the entire weight of the U.S. justice system to squeeze one woman. But silence is where Griselda Blanco lived. For 72 hours, she didn't speak a word. She didn't eat the lukewarm trays of food pushed through the slot. She simply sat. And while she sat in total darkness, two major cartel hits occurred in Miami. Two high-ranking informants were silenced in broad daylight, their mouths stuffed with dollar bills, a classic Griselda warning. The message was clear. She didn't need a voice to be heard. The frustration within the DEA turned into a fever pitch. Agent Palumbo flew to Dublin, California, personally to oversee a deep cell extraction. They stripped the room bare. They took her mattress, her Bible, her legal papers. All they found was a worn, unsharpened No. 2 pencil. It was mundane, almost pathetic. A small yellow wooden stick with a dull graphite tip. Palumbo held it up to the dim light of the hallway, turning it over. It looked like trash. But in the hands of the godmother, nothing was ever just what it seemed. Griselda used that pencil to leave microscopic coded marks on the margins of her legal documents. She wasn't writing letters. She was marking discovery papers, thousands of pages of evidence provided by the government. When her legal team came to visit, They weren't just discussing her defense. They were collecting work product. Under the shield of attorney-client privilege, the feds couldn't legally read those papers. Griselda was using the Constitution itself as her courier service. Enter Lucho, a former cartel pilot who had turned informant to save his own skin. Lucho was terrified. He knew that as long as Griselda was alive, he was a dead man walking. He approached the feds with a deal. He claimed Griselda had a shadow ledger, a notebook containing the names of every corrupt official, every judge, and every cop on her payroll. He told them she had it hidden in her cell, tucked away in a place no guard would ever think to look. He betrayed her location to secure a reduced sentence for his brother, hoping to strike the final blow against the woman who had once been his boss. What Lucho didn't realize was that Griselda had known he was talking to the feds weeks before he ever opened his mouth. She had seen the way the guards looked at him during exercise hour, the way the air changed when he walked into the yard. She didn't hide the ledger to keep it safe. She planted a fake version to see exactly who would come looking for it. She was tagging the rats in the system, using the feds' own greed for a big win against them. As the tension inside FCI Dublin reached a breaking point, the atmosphere changed. The guards began to feel it, the subtle shift in power. Griselda wasn't the prisoner anymore. She was the observer. She watched the way Warden Jenkins adjusted her collar when she was nervous. She noted which guards took extra long smoke breaks. She studied the prison's chaplain, Sister Maria, a woman of deep faith who spent hours in the SHU trying to find a soul worth saving. To the feds, Sister Maria was a harmless civilian. To Griselda, she was a blind spot in the security perimeter. The godmother began to attend confession, whispering through the mesh of the small chapel booth. She didn't talk about her sins. She talked about her sons. She talked about the charities she wanted to support in Colombia. She gave the sister names and addresses of orphans who needed help. Sister Maria, moved by the godmother's apparent turn toward God, carried these messages out of the prison walls, tucked into her prayer book. She had no idea she was delivering coordinates for hits and instructions for money laundering. The feds were looking for a radio, but Griselda was using a prayer. Agent Palombo eventually caught on to the anomaly. He realized the timing of the Miami hits coincided perfectly with the sisters' visits. He burst into the warden's office, throwing a stack of surveillance photos onto her desk. "She's using the church," he spat, his face red with a mix of fury and grudging respect. "She's using the one person we're taught not to suspect." But by the time they realized the depth of the deception, the trap had already been set. The feds prepared for a final, decisive confrontation. They were going to catch her with the shadow ledger and use it to bury her under a life sentence without the possibility of parole. They gathered their best interrogators and their most aggressive legal minds, preparing for the tribunal that would finally break the godmother. They thought they were the hunters. They thought the number 2 pencil and the hand-drawn map were the extent of her reach. They were about to find out that a cage is only a prison for those who don't own the keys to the guard's secrets. And Griselda Blanco had been collecting keys since the moment she stepped off the bus. In the darkness of the SHU, she smiled. The war wasn't over. It was just moving into the next phase. March 12, 1985. Federal Correctional Institution, Dublin. 10:42 a.m. Found. The word crackles over the tactical radio like a spark in a dry forest. Inside cell block 4, the air is thick with the dust of a frantic search. 4 guards, their faces flushed with the exertion of tearing a room down to its studs, stand over a shredded mattress. In the corner, Griselda Blanco is leaned against the cold concrete wall, her arms crossed, watching them with the detached interest of a scientist observing an ant farm. One of the officers reaches into the deep synthetic foam of the mattress and pulls out a small, leather-bound volume. It's the Shadow Ledger, the holy grail of the DEA's 5-year investigation. This is the moment Special Agent Bob Palombo has been dreaming of since he first heard the name The Godmother whispered in the back rooms of Miami. But as the officers lead Griselda down the long, echoing corridor toward the warden's office, something feels wrong. The godmother isn't fighting. She isn't shouting for her lawyers or cursing their names. She walks with a measured, rhythmic pace, her eyes fixed on the back of the warden's head. To understand the gravity of this moment, you have to understand the stakes. This wasn't just a book of names. This was the blueprint for the total destruction of the Medellin cartel's northern operations, or so the feds believed. The tribunal takes place in Warden Sarah Jenkins' office. It's a room that smells of stale coffee, floor wax, and the quiet desperation of a career bureaucrat trying to keep a lid on a pressure cooker. Palombo is there, leaning against the doorframe, his suit jacket off, his holster visible. Beside him are two stenographers and a high-ranking official from the Department of Justice. They have the ledger on the desk, placed center stage like a captured king on a chessboard. They expect Griselda to collapse. They expect her to see the weight of the evidence and start bartering for her life, or at least for the lives of her sons. Warden Jenkins clears her throat, the sound sharp in the sterile silence. She slides the ledger toward Griselda. "Lucho told us where to look," the warden says, her voice steady but thin. "Your pilot, your friend. He gave us the keys to your kingdom, Griselda. This book contains enough evidence to ensure you never see a sunrise outside of a fenced yard again. It's over." Griselda doesn't look at the book. She doesn't even look at Jenkins. Instead, her eyes drift to the warden's desk. There, sitting in a ceramic mug filled with pens, is a simple yellow No. 2 pencil. It's unsharpened, identical to the one they took from her cell weeks ago. A tiny, insignificant object. Griselda reaches out, her movements slow and deliberate, and taps the pencil with a manicured fingernail. "You think a woman like me keeps her soul in a mattress?" Griselda asks. Her voice is a low, gravelly rasp that seems to vibrate the very glass in the windows. She finally looks at Palombo. "Lucho didn't give you a key. He gave you a leash, and you were so hungry for a win that you put it around your own necks." Palombo's brow furrows. He reaches for the ledger, flipping it open to the first page. He expects to see a list of landing strips in the Everglades or the names of shell companies in Panama. Instead, his face goes pale. The first three names in the book aren't cartel members. They are federal agents. Two of them are sitting in the Miami DEA field office. The third is a prosecutor who helped build the case against her. Below the names are dates, amounts, and specific bank account numbers. The room turns ice cold. This isn't a ledger of her crimes. It's a fabrication, a meticulously crafted poison pill designed to implicate the very people trying to take her down. Griselda had known Lucho was a rat from the moment he hesitated during a phone call 3 months prior. She didn't kill him, she fed him. She spent weeks accidentally letting him see her hide this book. She wanted the feds to find it. She wanted them to bring it into this office, into the official record, where it would now be subject to discovery. She had just introduced a virus into the American legal system, and the warden was the one who had opened the door. "The real ledger," Griselda whispers, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "That was never in the cell. You see, Warden, your mail system is very efficient. Legal mail is a beautiful thing. It's protected, it's private. While you were busy searching my mattress for a ghost, I was mailing the real documents out, page by page, disguised as discovery notes, to my legal team." She leans forward, the light from the window catching the coldness in her eyes. "And while your agents were busy reading that fake book, my associates were busy reading the addresses of your children's schools. I know what your daughter had for breakfast this morning, Sarah. Oatmeal with brown sugar. She was wearing a blue ribbon in her hair." The warden's breath hitches. The silence in the room is no longer professional. It's paralyzed. In that single moment, the power dynamic of the Federal Bureau of Prisons flips on its axis. The hunters realize they are the ones being watched. They realize that the bars and the guards and the concrete weren't a cage for the godmother. They were a shield. Inside these walls, she was safe from her rivals, while the Fed's own bureaucracy was acting as her personal courier service. Griselda Blanco didn't need a phone. She didn't need a radio. She needed the system's own rules to work against itself. She used the pencil to mark the margins of her papers, codes that her legal team, men with guns and deep pockets, knew how to translate. By the time the feds realized the Sister Maria was carrying hits out in her prayer book, the orders had already been executed. In the next 72 hours, the fallout begins like a row of falling dominoes. Lucho, the informant who thought he had bought his freedom, is found in a motel room in suburban Virginia. There are no signs of a struggle, only a single No. 2 pencil left on his pillow. In Miami, the 3 agents named in the fake ledger are suspended, their careers destroyed by the mere suggestion of corruption, exactly as Griselda intended. The shadow ledger had done its job, not by telling the truth, but by creating a lie so toxic the government had to choke on it. 6 months later, Warden Sarah Jenkins resigns, citing personal reasons, and a desire to move her family to an undisclosed location in the Midwest. The security protocols at FCI Dublin are entirely rewritten, but the damage is done. The legend of the night in the SHU spreads through the federal system like a fever. Every inmate from California to New York hears the story of the woman who mapped the fortress from the inside and turned the warden into a messenger. The federal government eventually moved Griselda to other facilities, trying to stay one step ahead of her influence, but they never truly regained control. They realized that you can lock up a person, but you cannot lock up a reputation. The cocaine continued to flow, the hits continued to happen, and the godmother's shadow grew longer with every year she spent behind bars. Miami remained her city, even if she was viewing it through a 4-inch wide slit of reinforced glass. The city of Miami eventually learned what the feds already knew. The godmother's reach was longer than the shadows of the skyscrapers she helped build with her blood-soaked billions. She had proven that true power doesn't vanish behind bars, it simply becomes invisible to those who think they are in control. When she was finally released and deported decades later, she didn't leave as a broken woman. She left as a myth. A cage is only a prison for those who don't own the keys to the guard's secrets. Griselda Blanco didn't just survive the American prison system, she mastered it. She turned a 6-by-9-foot box into a throne room, and she turned the most powerful law enforcement agencies in the world into her unwitting accomplices. If a criminal can control the system from the inside, is the system itself the real criminal? Or is the system just a tool, waiting for someone with enough cold-blooded ambition to pick it up and use it? That's a question for the history books, and for the families of those who thought a steel door could stop the Black Widow. If you found this deep dive into the hidden wars of the 1980s fascinating, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. We go where the official records stop, uncovering the stories the world tried to bury. If you want to see more accounts of power, strategy, and the dark side of history, there's another story waiting for you right here on the screen. Before you go, tell us in the comments, do you think the feds were incompetent, or was Griselda simply an unstoppable force of nature? We'll be reading your theories. Until next time.